Hello friends, this is my husband and he is taking me to a secret destination. We've put the postcode into the sat-nav and it says we have a 3-hour drive and off we go. The problem was that I put the wrong postcode into the sat-nav. Either I put it in wrong or he gave it to me wrong. Either way, we shall never know. So instead of at the end of 3.5 hours arriving at our mystery destination, we rock up to a dead end in the middle of a housing estate cul-de-sac. So after blaming each other for this mistake, we put the right postcode into the sat-nav and it immediately tells us that we're off to the lost gardens of Heligan. Half an hour of the journey was conducted in silence until eventually I just couldn't stop laughing. We actually got lost trying to find the lost gardens of Heligan. I made a little video for YouTube about the trip to the Lost Gardens, and then I thought I would make this video about all the bits that I couldn't fit into the previous video. And so I've taken off the soundtrack and added this voiceover, and it's a little bit like the director's cut, so I hope you enjoy. I guess visiting gardens is probably an old person thing, but there's just something so nice about walking around a well-maintained space and getting lots of hints and tips for your own garden that makes me really enjoy these kind of trips. Philip doesn't like to walk that much, so once he'd seen everything that he needed to see, he jogged off to the coffee shop and I carried on walking round and navigating the place because I know that we're unlikely to ever come back. This was a once-in-a-lifetime trip. So glad the weather stayed good for us. It had been a terrible year, rain-wise, and we just hit lucky and got a glorious day in September for this trip. I think Heligan tells you that it's set over 200 acres and you have a time limit as to when you can enter. When you buy your ticket, you book in for a certain time. And so you can get quite stressed about will you see everything that you need to see in the time that you have. Don't worry about this. Most of the garden area is quite in a concentrated space and the rest of it are big fields that you wouldn't be walking around anyway. You'd just be viewing them from afar. So I think we took about an hour, maybe an hour and a half to look around. I could have stayed longer, but we had other places to go. Knowing what I know now, I'd highly recommend that if you ever visit places like this, pick a morning slot. And if you can, pick a time that's not in the school holidays or the half term. And that way you should get a much more relaxing, less crowded visit and be able to see more at your own pace rather than being herded from one area to another with a bunch of other people. This clip is showing the grapevines. The vines themselves are kept inside the greenhouse and the roots of the vines are outside where they get a lot more water, and apparently I think it's something to do with the temperature that makes them grow so much better. Obviously they've got a fantastic pond. You might notice that all ponds like that in these kind of well laid out gardens usually have a little ramp on the side of them so that if anything like hedgehogs falls in, they can swim around, find the little ramp and climb out without drowning. I do absolutely adore walled gardens. There's something so mysterious about them. Fell in love with them when I read The Secret Garden, which is all about a walled garden, as a kid. But having seen how they've been propping up those walls and thinking about the expense of having to replace them or renovate them, and also what do you do with the cold side of the walls? Every south-facing wall has a northern-facing opposite side, and once you've held away the sun from the northern side of the wall, you're left with not very much options as to what to put on that side of the wall. It seems like a lot of the time it's a potting shed. We looked through the laid out gardens and the kitchen gardens together, and then I went strolling off to find the big plants, and these are the plants that make Heligan famous and get lots of TV programmes. They are absolutely gigantic, and thankfully on this gorgeous day I wasn't getting all wet and the pavements were really nice and dry, not slippery, not treacherous, and it was just wonderful to see. It felt like I was in a different country, and I do appreciate that it's only the weather in this part of our country that could grow plants like this, which made it all the more special. There are sculptures at Heligan, usually made of eco-friendly materials or natural things, like James Eddy's charcoal sculpture, which I thought looked very much like Harry Potter's talking hat. The pictures of what it looked like when it was first built show that it's very different to how it is now. And that's one of the beauties of a place like this. You can go back time after time and see something different every time. And obviously it changes with the seasons, which is fantastic too. I really appreciated the wooden paths which are in a lot of the areas, because that meant that you weren't constantly looking at your feet and wondering if you were going to trip over something. You could just walk around and look at the plants and look up, raise your head and look up and actually see what you're there to see. And there is literally everywhere you look, there's something interesting to look at. Although I was trying to navigate with the charmingly hand-drawn plan, I was struggling to find the rope bridge, and I knew that it was a one-way rope bridge, and I was very lucky to be able to actually turn up at the side that you're supposed to set off on and walk across the bridge. It was only when I got to the other side and found a bunch of people who had followed the arrows and ended up at the wrong end of the bridge and therefore had to navigate their way back round to the side that I had just come from if they were going to walk across, that I realised some of the signage was a little bit misleading and some of the maps were a little bit misleading. But the thing is, just walk around. There's always something to see there, so try not to worry too much about getting lost, and just remember that if you're heading downhill, you're away from the car park and the cafes, and if you head uphill, you're likely to come across somebody and find a car park and a cafe. I will say that the toilets were all clean, but they were at the entrance to the gardens, and there was some more in the main, in another part where they do the weddings. But make sure you use the toilet before you set off. That's another tip. Although I do love living up north in England, it's hard not to get jealous of the much milder climate down south, especially when you see things like these bamboo. I got some seeds on the internet and tried growing them, and I'm not having very much success at all. And a lot of the delicate plants that you will see at Heligan would never survive a northern winter. It is a very specialised microclimate down there, which is one of the reasons why I wanted to travel and go all that way to find it and see it for myself. I'd highly recommend that if you can, you will see it for yourself too. Trying to find Heligan does make you realise that it is almost in the middle of nowhere. And the thing to bear in mind is that it must employ an awful lot of people, local people, who will depend on this for their livelihoods. And so when you're thinking about the ticket price, try and bear in mind that you're supporting a local business and a really valuable tourist attraction. I do tend to get all emotional and rather soppy about gardens. I'm sorry. Anyway, so if you remember at the start of this film, I explained that my husband and I actually got lost trying to find the lost gardens of Heligan. So when it came time to leave and progress to our next destination, I was doubly and triply careful that the postcode I was given was entered into my phone correctly, so that we wouldn't end up travelling miles out of our way for no reason. It seems like everywhere in this part of the country takes a while to get to because there's no big motorways and there's a lot of twisty roads, sometimes just single track with crossing places. So I was really concerned that we didn't go out of our way for no reason. So the sat-nav was duly hooked up and it said that it was taking us to Padstow to Rick Stein's, and we were going to go and try out one of my husband's bucket list challenges, which was dining at a Rick Stein restaurant. The only problem was that once the sat-nav had said proceed to route, etc., etc., the sat-nav told us to turn off at No Walden Screech Owl Sanctuary.
No.
Is that where we're going? I
No.
hope so.
No.
My husband didn't want to go to Gnome World and Screech Owl Sanctuary so badly that we missed the turn-off for Padstow and Rick Stein's and had to do a 10-mile detour to get back to it again. The problem was that due to our previous mistake, my husband thought I had deliberately changed the directions on the sat-nav rather than the sat-nav actually directing us to Padstow via Gnome World and Screech Owl Sanctuary. So rather than follow the blue line on the map, he decided to stay on the motorway. Thankfully, because we've been married a long time, that meant that we had both made a sat-nav faux pas, and we therefore had cancelled each one's mistake out. We could therefore stay married, stay happy, and go and have our meal at Padstow after carefully avoiding Gnome World and Screech Owl Sanctuary. So thanks very much for watching, everybody. I hope you enjoyed this little outtake. Please stay tuned. Please, please, please like and subscribe to my Lovely Place channel for more content a little bit like this and some different stuff. Anyway, bye for now. No Walden Screech Owl Sanctuary!
No.
Is that where we're going? I
No.
hope so.